Welcome to Click for IB Biology. In this video, we're looking at world biomes, their distribution and major features. There's a blank version of this presentation down in the description. You can download that and annotate it with your own notes. There you'll also find 10 questions with answers with which you can use to test your own understanding of this particular content. World biomes. So a biome could be described as a major world vegetation zone, and their distribution is determined primarily by a number of abiotic factors. In this case, we're going to initially take a look at average global temperatures and annual precipitation. When we plot onto this particular graph the major world vegetation zones, we arrive at this diagram here, which is known as a Whitaker diagram, after the famous Roger Whitaker, the ecologist also responsible for the proposal of the 5-kingdom classification system. So with this graph and model in hand, we have average temperatures here. Please note on the diagram that 0 degrees is here. Temperatures this way are negative, colder, and this way are positive, warmer. Rainfall increases as the axis shows as you go up the graph like this. Okay, then we've also provided for you the Whitaker diagram is also shown as a biome distribution map on a world map, and we can see even from visual inspection of the colors that there's clearly a pattern and transition as we move from equatorial regions here. If we go north, then there seems to be a sequence of colors, and those colors correspond to the different biomes. I should point out that the color system used in this graph is not identical to the color system in that graph, so one should be careful with interpretation. So we're looking at the distribution of the major world vegetation zones. So if we think of that as ecologists as our producers doing photosynthesis and generating net primary productivity in the form of biomass. So as we move from the equator north, then we expect to see a change in the average temperatures and a change in precipitation dependent upon your continental position. Starting from the poles and working south, the first biome we encounter is the Arctic biome, which in this image is actually barely shown by this location here, which is actually Greenland, and over here to the island system of Svalbard. So in this situation, we have near permanent low temperatures and low precipitation. In fact, on Whitaker's diagram, the polar zones would be in this location here and not actually drawn on this particular Whitaker diagram. So with low rainfall, since most of that occurs as snow precipitation and then forms ice, it's not available to biological systems. It's frozen solid. So with low amounts of water, and of course in these latitudes we have a low intensity of sunlight, then primary productivity is very, very low, if they're at all, and perhaps restricted just to some forms of algae on snow masses. These regions are characterized in their animal populations by large predators such as the polar bear, and here we have the walrus, and notably, of course, that they are very dependent upon the food available from the oceans, which are a warmer, more dependable source of nutrition than the land masses, or indeed the ice masses. As we move south from the polar regions, we then encounter the tundra, shown here in grey here, with particularly low average temperatures, and again relatively low precipitation. This is a typical image of a tundra region in the summertime, when primary productivity will be at its maximum, but in comparison to other biome regions of the world, still very, very low. The light intensity here, of course, is still relatively low. So we've got low light intensity, we have low temperatures, and low precipitation, but enough to allow the growth of things like mosses and lichens, stunted willow, to begin some level of primary production, so that for net primary production, this can be taken upon by animals such as deer population, elk populations are able to graze on that. And to a limited extent, the food chains are quite short, but some predators are able to operate in this area, such as the Arctic fox. In coastal regions, it's much more productive with the availability of food in the oceans, where you get many, many bird species taking advantage of the ocean foods. In the diagram, we are now in the light blue region of the northern latitudes. Moving south, annual temperatures increase, annual precipitation increases, the intensity of sunshine is higher, although we still have seasonal weather, but with short summers, and this allows the growth of the coniferous forests. So we have the conifers, which are characteristic of the taiga or the boreal forests. And in dark green here, these occupy the northern parts of Russia, across the northern Americas of Canada, extending all the way from Alaska across like this, and from Sweden and Norway through Finland, through Russia, and out to the eastern edge of the European continent. In our Whitaker diagram, our boreal forests are here. So the temperatures are higher, the rainfall is higher, the intensity of light is moderate, and so this supports the slow growth of these coniferous forests, upon which net primary productivity is higher, and then we begin to be able to support larger and more complex food chains. Notably, some of the larger predators tend to also be omnivores, so that they have alternative food sources at times of the year when food is in short supply. Let's move further south, and as we move further south, we would encounter the temperate seasonal forests with their spring, summer, autumn, and winter phases. In our diagram, these occupy the central position on a Whitaker diagram, with moderate temperatures and moderate amount of rainfall. But the net primary productivity now has risen considerably, so that it supports increasingly longer food chains and more complex food webs. However, the seasonal nature means that in the winter, these food chains and food webs will also often become less productive, and many animals can still be migratory out of these regions or take on a period of dormancy. In our distribution map of the world, we are in this region here and here. The European distribution, of course, is disrupted by the deforestation for urbanization, which has occurred in that area. If we move to a more central continental block, so whilst we still have the same same temperatures and latitudes, being in the same being central to a continental landmass means that grasslands often will find themselves in the rain shadow with precipitation reduced. So if we look on our Whitaker diagram, looking for these particular areas, we have the temperate grasslands are here, and notably they have a much lower rainfall than the temperate seasonal forests, although their temperatures are the same. These grasslands support large herds, large populations of grass-eating herbivores, and this leads to a complex relationship between the herbivore and the grasses, and the way in which those grasslands depend upon each other for their maintenance. So on our diagram, we have our temperate grasslands here, and these occur more or less in these areas here, not particularly clearly shown in this diagram. As we move further south, still we encounter, of course, the equatorial tropical rainforests with their very, very high net primary productivity, such that they support very complex food webs. These complex food webs also contain long food chains with the possibility of trophic levels at 4, perhaps even 5. These forests are highly stable ecological areas and unless disrupted by humans. And in our Whitaker diagram, they occupy this top zone up here, the tropical rainforests of the world. On our distribution map, the rainforests are in our lime green here, and of course across the Southeast Asian forests of Thailand, Malaysia, and Borneo. Here we have a typical forest with its structure, the typical canopy structure that we know of equatorial forests. So food chains are long and complex because the producers are capable of producing high net primary productivity with high intensity of light, high precipitation, and high temperatures. So those three factors combine to give the high net primary productivity to support that kind of biome. In a central continental position, the same as the tropical forests, if we take again, we think of a continent as being like this, but if you're in the center of such a thing, where you're in the rain shadow, your rainfall is necessarily low, but your temperatures can be very high. Then we encounter, of course, the subtropical deserts, as typified in this diagram by these orange zones here in North Africa, in Australia, and in this part of the United States over here. The food chains in this region are necessarily short because primary producers don't have the availability of water. So the lack of water means that net primary productivity is low, even with the intense sunshine. Animals and plants living in these regions are necessarily have extreme adaptations to surviving in the lack of water, and some of these will be discussed on our course, such as the desert rat, the desert fox, giraffes, and some of the snake species, and indeed, of course, this famous beetle here, the dune beetle, which is so desperate for water, turns its abdomen into the prevailing wind, such that the moisture in the wind condenses on its body and drips into its mouth. So that's its source of water, an extreme adaptation to be found particularly in the Namibian deserts. And so these world biomes then are a consequence of the distribution of the abiotic factors, principally of water availability, precipitation, temperature, and latitude. The next video in this sequence is now showing a chance to subscribe to the site, please. That would be appreciated. And of course, our playlist. A long video, this one.